Really? Good morning, everyone. I'm David Barish, Chairman of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. Before we begin, the usual request that people put their electronic devices on silent to not interfere with things. With us today is Fred Strathmeyer, representing Russell Redding, Secretary of Agriculture, Jen Langen, representing Joe Torcella, State Treasurer, and Bob Coyne, representing, is she still the Secretary? Eileen McNulty. Thank you very much. Quorum of the board being present, I'll call the proceedings to order. First, the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. By way of announcements, the board held an executive session yesterday, April 4th, to conduct quasi-judicial deliberations relating to matters that are going to be before the board today. Under new business, we'll hear from Kevin.
Good morning, Chairman Barish. Good morning, members of the board. Brought with me this morning for the Executive Director's report, Kevin Kyle, our Director of Racetrack Operations. Racetrack Operations is a unit within our Bureau of Gaming Operations. Kevin has recently completed and released the 10th annual benchmark report, which measures the statistics involving the impact of casino gaming in Pennsylvania and the horse racing industry. So I'd like to ask Kevin to give a brief summary of the trends that he has identified in this year's benchmark report.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The Office of Racetrack Gaming recently completed and just released the 10th annual benchmark report, which provides an overview of the benefit slot machine gaming revenue provides for the horse racing industry in Pennsylvania. This report also details key indicators within horse racing that outline the current health of the industry. One of the objectives of the Gaming Act is to assist the horse racing industry. The avenue utilized by statute to assist this industry was the creation of the Pennsylvania Racehorse Development Fund, which is funded by a portion of gross revenue generated from slot machine gaming. In 2016, approximately 10% of revenue generated from slot machine gaming was earmarked for the Pennsylvania Racehorse Development Fund, which amounted to $245 million. This revenue continues to provide increased purses for horsemen, awards for breeders, and funding for health and pension benefits. As a result, individuals and businesses are continuing to participate in live racing in Pennsylvania, with more than 18,000 horses racing in 2016, making more than 92,000 starts throughout the year. The racetrack casinos have also invested more than $70 million in new and renovated racing facilities over the past 10 years. These new facilities, such as barns, paddocks, and dormitories, have significantly improved the living and working conditions for horsemen and their employees who work at the tracks. Despite these resources, Pennsylvania horse and harness racing continues to face significant challenges in order to remain a viable entertainment option. Live racing handle increased by 17% in Pennsylvania since slot machine gaming commenced in 2006, mainly due to the opening of 2 new racetrack casino properties and increased wagering on Pennsylvania races by patrons nationwide. Although this increase has been beneficial, this past year marked the 3rd year since gaming commenced that live racing handle has declined year over year. $681 million was wagered on races held in Pennsylvania this past year, representing a 6% decrease when compared to the previous year. It's been widely recognized that the biggest challenge facing horse and harness racing is creating a new fan base and increasing the popularity of the improved racing product. As the information within this report suggests, however, revenue generated from slot machine gaming continues to provide an overall positive impact on racing and continues to benefit Pennsylvania agriculture. The report is available to the public and can be found on the board's website directly on our homepage. Thank you, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions or comments from the board this morning?
I just have one, if I can, Mr. Chairman. Kevin, if you have the answer to this question, What percentage of the total purse money being paid or paid in 2016 to race winners was slot revenue?
This past year it was 87%. The vast majority of purse revenue is generated from slot machine gaming now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, just a comment. So just so that the Gaming Control Board knows that in the past horse racing act that was just passed a year ago and was amended, there was a portion in there that calls for a 1% of the horse race development fund to be used for promotion and marketing. That those funds are now designated for that activity to hopefully be in a position to benefit this decline that we've seen. The department, as recently as 2 weeks ago at the commission meeting, we've hired a marketing director now as part of staff over at Ag, and so we are making strides to try to attack this decline head on, and I just felt that it's important to add that to the conversation here today.
Appreciate that, Fred. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next, Doug Sherman.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Our first agenda item relates to a proposed regulation, and that's Regulation 125-206, which is comprised of several miscellaneous amendments and the transition of a number of statements of policy into final promulgated regulations. The rulemaking will provide for surrender with prejudice, will reduce the number of reports operators are required to submit regarding junkets conducted at their facilities, and will amend language in Chapter 440A.5, which addresses the board's review of management agreements. The new language as to management agreements will direct that the board evaluate whether approving a management contract will create an undue concentration of economic activity, rather than whether it would create a monopoly, and this is to make it consistent with the review that we give to licensed facilities. Additionally, Rulemaking 125-206 will begin the transition process of a number of existing statements of policy. The statements of policy include provisions on criteria used to determine if a junket representative is a bona fide employee of a casino operator or an employee of a casino junket enterprise, SOPs on wide area progressive systems and remote system access, use of electronic credit system for process credit issued by the facility, and optional wagers in PyGal, and optional 5 of 6 progressive wagers in 3-card poker. There also are a number of amendments for consistency with other provisions of the Act that are set forth throughout that. And there's actually one new side wager that's being added to the Saigon 5-card game. I'd ask that there be a motion to approve the proposed regulation so it can begin the process of transitioning to a final form.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to adopt proposed regulation 125-206 as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The board has one petition before it for consideration. That's the petition of Craig Allen Trusky's request to be removed from the board's involuntary exclusion list. The matter will be decided on the documents filed of record as is uncontested. And as always, the board has in advance of this meeting been provided with all of the pleadings in the matter. On February 8th, 2012, the board placed Mr. Trusky on the board's involuntary exclusion list after it was determined that he assisted a 19-year-old in gaining access to Rivers Casino. He admitted to the actions at that time and was permanently evicted by the Rivers and subsequently placed on the involuntary exclusion list by this board. It's now been over 5 years since he was placed on the list, and he is requesting to be removed. There is no evidence that he has in any way violated the order, and there is no objection from OEC so the matter is appropriate for the board's consideration.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant Craig Allen Trusky's petition for removal from the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Okay, next reporting reports and recommendations will be Deputy Chief Counsel Steve Cook.
Morning. Next before the board for consideration are 4 reports and recommendations received from the Office of Hearings and Appeals. These reports and recommendations, along with the complete evidentiary record in each matter, have been provided to the board in advance of today's meeting, and additionally, in each case, the person that is subject to the report and recommendation have been notified that the board would be taking the matter up today. If any of these persons are present and wish to address the board briefly, they can come forward when their matter is called. The first report and recommendation before the board pertains to William Maley. Mr. Maley was issued a non-gaming employee registration in December of 2007 and worked as a food server at the Meadows Racetrack and Casino until he was terminated in May of 2016. On July 8th of 2016, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a complaint to revoke Mr. Maley's non-gaming registration. The complaint alleges that on May 1st, 2016, during the course of his workday, Mr. Maley stole $140 by failing to generate checks for 3 of his tables, keeping the cash left by the patrons or by a patron and applying discounts to guest checks that he was not authorized to provide. A hearing in this matter was held on November 30th. Both the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Mr. Maley appeared at the hearing, offering testimony and documentary evidence. At that hearing, Mr. Maley testified because Sundays were particularly busy days, he would open up checks for buffet purchases in advance so he would be ready upon a customer's request for a bill. Additionally, he testified that he mistakenly applied free buffet coupons to the wrong check and in a separate transaction inadvertently rang up the wrong number of free buffets on a check. He also stated that cash he received from a customer was in fact a tip and was not unlawfully gained. After taking all of the evidence into consideration, the hearing officer issued a report and recommendation recommending that Mr. Maley's non-gaming registration not be denied, in that there was no evidence of theft, but rather just simple failure to follow the policies of the restaurant. And that is the recommendation before the board, that his application or that his registration not be denied.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals and deny Enforcement Counsel's request that William Maley's non-gaming employee registration be revoked.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter to be heard by the board is the report and recommendation pertaining to John Rossi. Mr. Rossi was issued a gaming employee occupation permit in January of 2016 and worked as a table games dealer at Harrah's, Philadelphia. On January 9th, 2017, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for an emergency suspension of Mr. Rossi's gaming permit after receiving notice that he'd been arrested and charged with 2 theft-related felony charges and a gaming offense. Specifically, during December of 2016, on several occasions, while performing his duty as a table games dealer, Mr. Rossi failed to collect losing wagers from patrons, paid players for losing hands, failed to collect surrendered wagers, and allowed players to see his cards during the game. It is alleged that Mr. Rossi's actions cost Harrah's in excess of $10,000. As a result of these charges, the executive director issued an emergency suspension as requested by Enforcement Counsel. Subsequently, a hearing on the validity of the emergency suspension was held on January 31st pursuant to the board's regulations. Enforcement Counsel appeared for the hearing, offering testimony and evidence in support of the allegations. Mr. Rossi did not attend the hearing. As a result, the hearing officer issued a report recommendation recommending the suspension remain in place, and that's the recommendation for the board.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the suspension of John Rossi's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next report and recommendation before the board pertains to Jonathan Scott. Mr. Scott was issued a gaming employee permit in May of 2012 and worked as a table games dealer at Harrah's, Philadelphia. On January 6, 2017, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for an emergency suspension of Mr. Scott's gaming employee permit after receiving notice that he'd been charged with 20 misdemeanors and 8 felony offenses. Specifically, it was alleged that Mr. Scott was an accomplice in a robbery of a BB&T bank where he detained a bank employee and customer in an office while an accomplice held a firearm to the bank teller and demanded money. As a result of these charges, the executive director issued an emergency suspension. Pursuant to the board's regulations, a hearing on the validity of the emergency suspension was held. Despite receiving proper notice, Mr. Scott failed to attend and did not ask for a continuance. As a result, the evidence put into the record at that hearing was only by OEC and supported the criminal charges that were filed. Having heard that evidence, the hearing officer recommends that the suspension remain in place, and that's the recommendation before the board.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the suspension of Jonathan Scott's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The final report and recommendation before the board today is that of William Stewart. In April of 2016, Mr. Stewart submitted a gaming employee permit application seeking work as a security officer at the Sugar House Casino. On July 27th, the Office of Enforcement Counsel issued a notice recommending that Mr. Stewart's application be denied based on his noncompliance status with the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue, his failure to provide requested tax information to the board, and his failure to disclose his complete criminal history, which included a 2010 felony conviction. With regard to Mr. Stewart's criminal history, he only disclosed one arrest on his application. However, BIE's investigation discovered numerous offenses in his past. Additionally, his 2010 felony conviction was for making false statements in the application to possess a fire or to carry a firearm. And as a result of that felony conviction, the Gaming Act excludes him from eligibility to receive a gaming permit. As a result, the hearing officer's recommendation is that the application be denied as ineligible under the Act.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding William Stewart's gaming employee occupation permit application as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second, please. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
And that concludes the matters of the Office of Chief Counsel.
Sue Hensel, Director, Bureau of Licensing.
Thank you, Chairman Barish and members of the board. Before the board today will be 755 principal, key, gaming, and non-gaming employee applicants. In addition, there will be the consideration of 14 gaming service provider applicants. The first matter for your consideration is the approval of principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a proposed order for 2 principal and 7 key employee licenses. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of principal and key employee licenses as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next, there are temporary principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order regarding the issuance of temporary licenses for 2 principal and 19 key employees. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of temporary principal and key employee credentials as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
There are also gaming permits and non-gaming registrations. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a list of 436 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted temporary or full occupation permits, and 246 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted registrations under the authority delegated to the Bureau of Licensing. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the order.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the issuance of gaming employee permits and non-gaming employee registrations as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also, there are recommendations of denial for 3 gaming employee applicants. In each case, the applicant failed to request a hearing within the specified time frame. The Bureau of Licensing has provided you with orders addressing the applicants who the Office of Enforcement Counsel has recommended for denial. I ask that the board consider the order approving the denials.
Enforcement Counsel continues to request denial in each instance.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board deny the gaming employee applications as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration are withdrawal requests for key and gaming employees. In each case, the permit or registration or license is no longer required. For today's meeting, I have provided the board with a list of 1 key, 34 gaming, and 6 non-gaming employee withdrawals for approval. I ask that the board consider the order approving the list of withdrawals.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the withdrawals as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next, we have an order to certify the following gaming service provider: Comp Trading LLC, doing business as MTM Sales Corp. I ask that the board consider the order approving this gaming service provider for certification.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider certification as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Finally, for your consideration are gaming service provider registrations. The Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order and an attached list of 13 registered gaming service provider applicants. I ask that the board consider the order registering these gaming service providers.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider registration as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you, Sue.
That concludes the matters of the Bureau of Licensing.
Office of Enforcement Counsel.
The Office of Enforcement Counsel will present 7 matters today for the board's consideration, consisting of 1 consent agreement, 2 revocations, and 4 involuntary exclusion. The first matter on the agenda, on the OEC's portion of the board agenda, is for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc., doing business as Parks Casino. The matter will be presented by Senior Enforcement Counsel Dustin Miller. Mr. Schroeder is here. I ask that he enter his appearance and introduce the individual he has with him, and that if there's any testimony, that the individual be sworn to give that testimony.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Brian Schroeder, S-C-H-R-O-E-D-E-R. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Chief Compliance Officer for Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment. And with me is our Director of Security, Jared. Introduce yourself.
Could you please stand to be sworn, just in case?
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dustin Miller, here on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. This consent agreement arises from 2 incidents of underage gaming that occurred at Parks Casino on March 12, 2016 and April 8, 2016. Both the Pennsylvania Racehorse Development and Gaming Act and the regulations promulgated under the Act prohibit a slot machine licensee from allowing persons under the age of 21 to access the gaming floor and or engage in gaming in Pennsylvania casinos. On March 12, 2016, an individual under the age of 21 entered Parks Casino at 9:06 a.m. The individual was 20 years old at the time of this incident. The individual was able to enter the casino without being asked for identification. The individual remained on the gaming floor of Parks Casino for approximately 1 hour and 36 minutes before it was ascertained that she was under the age of 21. The individual placed 2 wagers at a roulette table while on the gaming floor and did not consume any alcoholic beverages. The underage individual was detected by a table games dealer at a roulette table after she was asked for identification, which revealed her to be underage. Although the table games dealer immediately reported the presence of the underage individual to her supervisor, the supervisor did not immediately report the presence of the underage individual to the security or surveillance department. A second supervisor reported the presence of the underage individual after approximately 6 minutes elapsed from the time of discovery, which gave the individual time to leave the casino. Pennsylvania State Police and the Bureau of Casino Compliance were notified of the incident at that time. However, due to the passage of time, the underage individual was not positively identified and was not criminally charged by Pennsylvania State Police for this incident. A surveillance review of the incident shows that the underage individual had face-to-face contact with 8 employees of the casino while on the gaming floor. With regard to the April 8th, 2016 incident, an individual under the age of 21 entered Parks Casino at 7:58 a.m. In that instance, the individual was 20 years of age at the time of this incident. The individual was able to enter the casino with an associate without being asked for identification by the security officer stationed at the west entrance to the casino. The individual remained on the gaming floor of Parks Casino for approximately 1 hour and 4 minutes before it was ascertained that she was under the age of 21. The individual played 27 different slot machines while on the gaming floor, and she did not consume any alcoholic beverages. The underage individual was detected when her associate was taken into custody by Pennsylvania State Police for possession of a controlled substance, and the associate told Pennsylvania State Police about the presence of the underage individual. However, when her associate was taken into custody, the underage individual quickly exited the casino. The associate also told Pennsylvania State Police that the underage individual had entered Parks Casino previously on that same day. Surveillance footage confirmed that the underage individual had previously entered Parks Casino at 3:34 a.m. Although the individual was stopped and asked for identification when she entered the casino, another security officer interceded on her behalf and granted her entrance onto the gaming floor. The underage individual proceeded onto the gaming floor where she remained for the next 3 hours playing slot machines. Subsequent investigation revealed that the underage individual had unsuccessfully attempted to enter the casino a third time in between her first and second forays onto the gaming floor at Parks. During both instances that the underage individual was granted access to the gaming floor, she had no face-to-face contact with any other employees of Parks except for the security officers when she entered the casino. The underage individual did not consume any alcoholic beverage in either instance. The underage individual did use an on-site ATM machine and a ticket redemption machine while at Parks. The underage individual was positively identified in this matter and was cited by mail by Pennsylvania State Police with a criminal violation of the Gaming Act for underage gaming. On February 24th, 2017, the parties entered into a consent agreement to settle these outstanding compliance matters. If approved, this consent agreement will be the 4th penalty assessed against Parks for violating the Act and board regulations pertaining to underage gaming since its last renewal, and 9th overall penalty for underage gaming violations. The terms of the agreement include a provision that Parks Casino shall reinforce existing policies and provide training, guidance, and reinforcement to employees to minimize the opportunity for similar incidents of this nature to occur in the future. And also, Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc. shall pay a total fine of $25,000. Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc. shall also pay a fee of $2,500 for costs incurred by the Office of Enforcement Counsel, Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement, and other related staff, which is consistent with the board's billing policy. Both the fine and cost shall be due within 5 days of the board's approval of this consent agreement. As Cyrus stated earlier, counsel for Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc. are here today along with a witness, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Are there any comments from Greenwood at this point?
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. As I've said before, as Tom Bonner said before, Parks strives for regulatory compliance at 100%. Sometimes we fall short, and these two incidents we did fall short. I'd like to give a quick comment and some of the specifics of the incident Director Fretz can speak to. First, after these last two incidents occurred approximately 3 weeks apart last year, Director Fretz and his staff met with our executive management and reviewed the design and layout of our casino. I was here last meeting discussing our design and layout of the casino. Upon looking at the valet entrance and valet exit of our building, Director Fretz recommended planners be installed to create a choke point or a funnel system. So we installed 4 planners in both entrances to funnel people into a set place for ID checks. In addition, we installed identification scanners at each of the entrances, both valet, pickup, and drop-off, as well as our west entrance, our secondary entrance. Finally, Director Fretz issued progressive discipline to all the officers involved, ranging from a 2-day suspension to a 4-day suspension without pay. Finally, I'll let Jared speak to the individual incidents. Do you want to go ahead and do that?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and other members of the board. The first instance in March was the result of a solo security officer being on the post till 11 a.m. This happened, I believe, at around 9 a.m. in the morning. There was an individual who was hollering in the to the left of the security officer. It turned out to be jubilation. That individual had won a jackpot, but you can clearly see in the video that the security officer was drawn to the person who was hollering. And at that very moment, when he walked to his left to determine where the noise was coming from, this underage 20-year-old female gained access to the floor. He was suspended, but it was human error in that it could possibly happen again. The whole job of a security officer is to protect the public, and that's what he was doing at that time. He believed that there was some type of a disturbance. As far as the second incident went, I fully believe that female utilized a counterfeit driver's license in the past, and the security officers actually recognized her. But they violated the SOP in that anyone who leaves and returns within 5 minutes or 2 minutes is to be checked again. They did not do that. The one security officer overrode the other security officer and said that he knew who she was for whatever reason and allowed access. All three of those individuals were suspended and given progressive discipline.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments from the board? In that case, I'll take a motion, please.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board reject the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you very much.
The next two matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed complaints seeking the revocation of one gaming permit and one gaming service provider certification issued by the board. Each complaint has been filed with the board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the persons named in each complaint. The person named in each complaint failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment and properly served the same upon each named person. Therefore, the facts in each complaint are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, we'll provide a brief summary of the facts and request the appropriate board action.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Benjamin Farrell, F-E-R-R-E-L-L. The next matter for your consideration is a complaint for revocation of Deshaun Crisden's gaming employee permit. From October 24th, 2016 to November 24th, 2016, Mr. Crisden stole $1,280 from Valley Forge during 44 separate transactions in which casino patrons purchased casino access passes. During these transactions, Mr. Crisden would keep the cash given to him by the patrons and not place it in the cash register. On November 30th, 2016, PSP arrested and charged Mr. Crisden with 44 counts of unlawful taking and 44 counts of receiving stolen property. Those charges remain pending. At this time, OEC requests the board issue an order revoking Mr. Crisden's gaming employee permit.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the revocation of Deshaun Crisden's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Michael Rowland, ROL-A&D with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter is a request to revoke the gaming service provider certification of Roma Concrete, Inc. and its sole qualifier, William J. DeFabio. In July of 2015, Mr. DeFabio was charged with criminal use of a communication facility, the manufacture, delivery, or possession with intent to manufacture or deliver a controlled substance, and both criminal attempt and criminal solicitation of the same. All of the charged offenses were classified as felonies. Mr. DeFabio ultimately entered into a negotiated guilty plea to the manufacture, delivery, or possession with intent to manufacture or deliver a controlled substance, a felony, and all the other charges were withdrawn. The matter is now before the board to consider the revocation of the gaming service provider certification of Roma Concrete, Inc. and its sole qualifier, William J. DeFabio.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Roma Concrete's gaming service provider certification as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The remaining 4 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed petitions seeking the involuntary exclusion of individuals whose presence in a licensed facility are inimical to the interests of the Commonwealth and are licensed gaming therein. In each instance, the petition for exclusion has been filed with the Board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the petition. The individual named in the petition failed to respond within 30 days as required by Board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment in each instance and properly served the same upon each named individual. Therefore, all facts in each petition are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the Board, and the matters are presently ripe for the Board's consideration. In each instance, if the Board orders the proposed exclusion, each individual's photo, personal identifiers, and summary of the inimical conduct will be placed on the Board's public website.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Board. John Crowe, C-R-O-H-E, for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter for the Board's consideration is the Office of Enforcement Counsel's request to place Mark Sermonero on the Board's excluded persons list. On August 5th, 2016, Mr. Sermonero threatened staff at Mohegan Sun Pocono by claiming he brought a bomb into the casino, and on February 15th, 2017, pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that Mark Sermonero be placed on the Board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Mark Sermonero to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter for the Board's consideration is the Office of Enforcement Counsel's request to place Melvin Myers on the Board's excluded persons list. On August 30th, 2016, Mr. Myers assaulted a dealer at Mohegan Sun Pocono, and on January 31st, he pleaded guilty to harassment. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that Melvin Myers be placed on the Board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Melvin Myers to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter for the Board's consideration is the Office of Enforcement Counsel's request to place Wendell Moyse on the Board's excluded persons list. On October 21st, 2016, Mr. Moyse illegally pass-posted or pinched 11 bets while gaming at Mohegan Sun Pocono. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that Wendell Moyse be placed on the excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Wendell Moyse to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Thank you. Glenn Stewart for the Office of Enforcement Counsel, S-T-U-A-R-T. Next for the board's consideration is the placement of Ernest Reed, a.k.a. Raymond Williams, a.k.a. Reggie Williams, on the board's exclusion list. In January of 2016, Mr. Reed was caught pass-posting a wager at Harrah's, Philadelphia. As a result, Mr. Reed was charged with 4 counts of knowingly by trick or fraud to win or reduce a wager, 4 counts of unlawful to take claim with intent to defraud, and 1 count of theft by deception, false impression. According to court records, on January 30th, 2017, Mr. Reed was found guilty of these charges and was subsequently sentenced to 2 years of probation. He's required to pay $300 in restitution to Harrah's, and he is required to stay away from all casinos in Pennsylvania. Along with these charges, Mr. Reed was also charged with 5 counts of forgery, unauthorized act in writing, due to his passing of 5 counterfeit $100 bills at Harrah's between October 2015 and December of 2015. According to court records, on January 30th, 2017, Mr. Reed was found guilty of these charges and was subsequently sentenced to 36 days to 18 months in prison. He must serve 3 years of probation, pay $500 in restitution to Harrah's, and have no direct or indirect contact with all casinos. As such, the Office of Enforcement Counsel respectfully requests the board place Ernest Reed, a.k.a. Raymond Williams, a.k.a. Reggie Williams, on the board's exclusion list.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Ernest Reed to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Thank you.
That concludes our business.
Thank you very much. That concludes the business for today's meeting. Our next scheduled public session will be held on Wednesday, April 26th. That meeting will begin at 10 a.m. in this room. Are there any final comments or questions or other pieces of wisdom for the board?
Move to adjourn.
Hearing none, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.